movers, and welcome back to the high seas, the Bering Sea to be exact. Freezing out here. Really also starting to feel my age aboard this vessel, but more of that in the conversation with today's guest later. This is a podcast where we tackle the big questions. How does creativity work? How do others navigate their lives? And most importantly, is the truth out there? Another question, have you been good this year? And what you're asking Father Christmas to bring you. Whatever it is you're up to, wishing you a peaceful one out there. Thank you for spending your time with us this year as we've been out and about, solving one mystery after another. The mystery I'm trying to solve at the moment is how am I going to cook for 13 people using only a small electric oven and an air fryer? Answers on a Christmas postcard, please. Big shout out while I'm here to Mac Roberts' Christmas pantomime. Saw that this week in Stirling, and honestly, I love what you're doing out there, comedians of the land, but that is the most I've laughed at anything all year. Really wonderful stuff. What they've effectively done is splice together the tales of Snow White and The Sound of Music, and thrown in some dance routines and a few Greg Wallace jokes for good measure. Someone who I know for sure will be enjoying the delights of the stage over the Christmas period, because she enjoys the delights of the stage all the year round, is today's guest. It's theatre producer and festival manager Ailie Crerar-Blythe. Ailie is based in Glasgow and currently works for the National Theatre of Scotland, where she's worked on many shows at the Edinburgh festivals, including Exodus, Throne and June Carter Cash, The Woman, Her Music and Me. We talk a little bit about that in the chat. As well as NTS, she's worked for Mascarade Opera, Glasgow International, Paisley Opera, Soundplay projects, to name but a few. In the chat, Ailie talks about how theatre shows are made, the challenges with finding funding, touring shows around Scotland, the joy of dancing, freelancing, and The X-Files Season 2, Episode 19, Død Kalm, in which Mulder and Scully are called in when a boatload of survivors from the US Navy are found to have aged many decades in the course of a few days. Great episode this, and in both respects, great X-Files episode, great episode of the podcast. So it's brilliant to speak to Ailie and hear what she's up to. As always, if you like our show, please do leave me a message, subscribe, review, follow us on X, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, send us a postcard. I'm not divulging my address, but I'm sure you can find it if you look hard enough online. In the meantime, a very Merry Christmas to you all out there. Here's Ailie.
Pretty good. A bit scunnered after quite an intense Fringe run, and going straight. The show that I'm working on is out on tour at the moment, so it's intense. But it's all positive. So
yeah, is that's the June Carter show? Is it?
Yes, yeah. So June Carter Cash, The Woman, Her Music and Me. Which we did a full Fringe run, and then they're sort of touring around Scotland until the end of September. Yeah, which is great, but it's also the September is also the time when other artists start wanting to get in the room to develop their new work. Everyone's kind of out of the Fringe, and they're like, okay, what's next? And
right.
You're like, ah, my God, there's a lot on.
Yeah, it's it's definitely a conveyor belt, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd love to hear you talk about, a lot of things actually, but firstly, what's your process that you go through in terms of development through to production and beyond? I imagine it's different on each performance, but do you approach things in a similar way when you're coming on to a production?
Yeah, I suppose most of the kind of work that I've done both with National Theatre Scotland and as a freelance producer have been with kind of maybe earlier career artists, which is kind of lovely in that then you're sort of starting something new as a team, I guess, which is, really nice. But the process, I mean, honestly, the thing that makes the most difference is just time, being able to give things time to develop and kind of build trust and, in a team. So mostly that will look like probably bringing in director and writer together and, trying to have a director kind of, I feel like, on board fairly early on. So as you're working with a writer, I suppose I should say actually that most of the work that I've done in the theatre context at least is sort of writer-led.
Right.
So as opposed to a kind of devising processes or, these kinds of things, normally starting with a text.
Is that you as a freelancer looking for work to get underway, or is that under the bracket of National Theatre Scotland? Are they bringing stuff to you and saying, we'd like to develop this, and then do you take it away, or how does it work in terms of your sort of day-to-day and how you manage your work? Have you got various projects on at the same time?
Yeah, previously as a freelancer, it was quite often kind of speaking to individual artists and then being like, oh, we want to get this funding application in, can you help us with that? And then if we come off, we'll work together. And sort of since moving away to that and becoming full-time at National Theatre Scotland, so we have a sort of large number of projects that are in development at any one time. I think at the moment we've got about 40 different projects that are at various kind of different stages. And so I guess the process for that tends to be that we're kind of, I guess, always having meetings with different artists, and we've got, associate artists as well who are bringing ideas to the table. Then we'll the sort of standard process is that we'll kind of commission a writer, and that might be actually sort of firstly sending them off to go and do some research about an idea, or thinking about if it's something they can see developing into a story, or going away and sort of writing a first draft, and sort of working with them kind of from that text in the first instance to then starting to put a team together, testing it out in a room, and sort of looking at the whole picture of what we've got on the slate, as it were, to see where things might sort of start to land, and if there might be other partners that we want to bring in on those. So my kind of day-to-day, I suppose, with National Theatre Scotland is doing things like getting those kind of commission agreements out and advising artists on the kind of things that are useful for us to see, or helping them form, for example, if they are doing research trips, what that might look like, their schedules, where they might go, who they might talk to things that are further on in the process where we're getting them into the room that's sort of working with kind of the lead artist. So normally that's a writer and director by that point, to be like, right, who else do we bring in? Is it bringing in actors to see how the script is developing? Is it bringing in maybe designers to think about how this might work from a design point of view? And that's sort of, a bit further down the line when you're getting close to, kind of going into production, which, is we're so kind of fortunate, I guess, to be able to put the time and resource into those kind of development processes. I suppose, kind of as a freelancer, one of the companies I'd worked with previously, Sleeping Warrior, we might get some Creative Scotland funding to do, maybe a week or maybe 2 weeks. Oh my God, that was of kind of, bringing, and that generally would take the form of maybe bringing actors into a room, maybe a designer to be like, okay, let's get the script into the best possible form it can be, and start thinking about what this might look like. So then when we're applying for funding to make the show, we have a really good idea of what this show is. So, for example, Sleeping Warrior's show To Save the Sea, which is coming up this autumn.
Right.
So I'm not working with them anymore, but I did work with them when they were doing development on that show. So that was, getting actors into the room to sort of test and that's a musical as well, so test the songs and the structure of that, which was great. And I think that's, I'm really looking forward to seeing that show, because even just in the development, you're like, this is, really exciting thing to be involved in.
I mean, what's the turnaround time then? And are you, I guess from what you said there, you can be a little bit more laid back the wrong word, but you can give creatives a bit of space in terms of deadlines. But where are those deadlines coming from? Is that funding imposed, or you've gone, right, we need to get this show together for next June, so working back from that, we need to have the script ready, we need to have it cast at a certain point, we need to have design in place by then? Are you working backwards, or does it kind of depend?
Yeah, it can be a bit of both. So I suppose something like June Carter Cash, that's been kind of we've been working on that for about 4 years.
Right.
And that's from sort of sending Charlene, asking her to go and write a kind of overview of what she saw the show as being, and then sort of supporting her to go and do some more research and sort of get some mentoring around her writing practice, and then sort of supporting through various drafts and piecing that all together. So that was quite a long one. It's a kind of funny thing because there is a balance between sort of giving people the time, but then also being like, okay, and then actually what's the kind of giving a kind of goal to aim towards in terms of kind of then producing it. So for to continue using June as the example, had always envisaged it as a show that would do really well at the Fringe. So that's sort of then looking like, okay, well, we've got, if we do a Fringe show every year, for example, being like, okay, what are the kind of various states of readiness of everything that might fit into that kind of slot, and then being like, okay, actually, right, we think June looks like it's on track to be ready for 2024, so let's aim for that, and then from there start working backwards for those kind of other production elements, like the bringing in the design team and what those design deadlines are, and building a tour and all of this kind of thing around it. So that kind of production work for me tends to kick off maybe about 6 to 9 months before it's actually before we're in rehearsals or a stage.
Yeah, and I guess they're thinking, the design team are thinking, all fine to figure out what it's going to look like in a room for, 30 performances at the Fringe, but then how on earth are we going to take this on tour? And set it up.
Yeah, and that's always the challenge. I think that, so much work in Scotland, the only way it really gets made is if it can tour, and sometimes that might only be to 2 or 3 locations, but sometimes it might be touring funded shows. I think they certainly used to have to get to between, I think, 10 and 12 venues as a minimum to be eligible for that funding, and similarly National Theatre Scotland, all of our work tours because we didn't have a theatre, so it is always a challenge, I think, for everyone to think about. But I don't know, it's so much kind of in I feel like the kind of theatre industry's DNA in Scotland of just that's what you do, take the work to the people, and it's a thing that I feel really kind of like passionate about. I mean, it's like, love doing stuff at the Fringe, but actually there's also moments where you're going up to a town hall in Ullapool or the Mull Theatre or whatever, and I'm like, actually this is sort of that's my bag. Really.
That is so brilliantly imagine totally satisfying and exciting, and the Fringe is such a kind of bubble that is, if you're entrenched in that for a month, you sort of forget that it's sort of speaking to a very sort of finite section of society, really. So getting the work out, and I've had guests on the podcast in the past who've talked about Scotland's legacy of storytelling, and how that's a wonderful thing, and that's kind of we touch wood continues to thrive in the future. But I imagine the current state of arts funding in Scotland doesn't fill you with a lot of hope.
No, it really doesn't. I mean, I think it's interesting, that legacy of storytelling, and how much that also influences people making work that has music in some way, whether that's the kind of like the play with songs, or now into the full-blown musicals. But you're right, it's like, this is all great and positive, and people are making such great work, and it does feel like very worrying of whether people will actually be able to continue to do that. I think there's such a thing of actually sort of sometimes holding on to, it's not positivity because that can feel naive, but I think and it's hard because, you know, artists have had to fight for their kind of right to exist,
Yeah.
you know, for, you know, probably more than a decade now at this point. But I was thinking about things like when the announcement about Summer Hall being put up for sale,
Yes.
for example, came out, and people, you know, you could react to that with a sort of sadness. And I was like, well, no, if we act with sadness, that sort of implies that it's already happening or it's a done thing. But if we can react to these things with, you know, it's not anger, but, you know, kind of like a fight.
Oh,
totally,
you know
I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
I think that's that. I always say that it's that anger is a more useful emotion than sadness, you know, because you can channel a passion of an anger. And it's, you know, into something that's actually going to galvanize people, and it's, you know, the kind of wave of like, you can't be serious. You know, what are you talking about? You're not going to turn Summer Hall into some flats, are you? You know, it's practically one of Europe's greatest multi-platform art spaces. You know, you walk around there, and I felt so privileged to go and see stuff this summer and to spend any time in there and see things. The idea of that could happen, it's like, oh, no, over my dead body. Absolutely, no. And that felt like the kind of overwhelming feeling that people responded with.
Yeah, and I think that thing of, you know, people, it's that kind of call to arms of being like, if you value these things, show up for them and, you know, stand to them. And there's part of me that wonders how much people will start, you know, maybe as a kind of into this sort of next phase post-COVID of being like, you know, we got so used to sitting in our homes and just watching streaming and all of this kind of thing, and now this sort of these aftershocks that affect our communities of losing not just, you know, theatres or art spaces, but, you know, pubs or restaurants or whatever, and being like, oh no, actually, like, if you want those things to be there, you have to go to them.
Yeah, and you're right. It's cross arts because you know, I've spoken to musician friends in the past, and they say it's so tricky. You put a gig on, and you're having to force people to buy tickets, you know, a month beforehand, and gigs are getting cancelled 2 days before because they can't rely on the fact that people might just turn up, that kind of transient footfall. So yeah, I don't know the way around that, but it does certainly feel, maybe from the cinema side, that people want a kind of collective experience again and want to get back into cinemas at least. And I don't know if that extends to other art forms, but it's certainly I mean, that's, I've said in the past on the podcast, that was what was so nice coming out of COVID and the Barbenheimer thing, where you've got, like, you know, just people turning up in fancy dress and just wanting that that collective experience again, which you can't have at home if you just sat looking at your phone and you're not totally engaged with the work.
Yeah, completely. And I think there is something in that. I suppose one of the slightly tricky things is that we sort of see, you know, people do come out for those like big events, like, as you say, the Barbenheimer thing, or, you know, like these stadium gigs, you know, like Taylor Swift would sell out, you know, I think, or Oasis, you know, it's like people kind of come out for these really big things. And I think the challenge is that also to sort of be like, encourage people to be like, to not just go for those really, is to make the habit of it again, to sort of reform that thing of, you're not just going to Taylor Swift, but you'll also go to your local, you know, gig venue down the road and support the musicians there, because you get a very different experience, of course, but it's that kind of collective experience has value.
I guess people might wrongly, you know, see it as an expense to go out, but you know, if you're spending £9 a month on Netflix plus everything else that you're spending to watch at home, it's not that much of a big leap to then go, well, I'll just get the bus into town and see a gig or see a show. So yeah, I think that's a collective education that we need, I think. Totally.
And I can see that thing. Yeah, you're right. It's that, like, if you don't have a lot of disposable income, and what do you choose to spend it on? Is it that, you know, you're seeing your icon, you know, in a kind of maybe once in a lifetime situation, and saving up and making that big expense, or you sort of spread it out throughout the year, and it's a really hard choice to make. And I mean, you see that in theatre as well, of people, you know, the people will go to theatre once a year to see Panto, and the struggle to get people to come back for other things.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I've never known it before. Just through work, I've ended up going to a lot of pantos around Scotland, and it's like packed. And I was like, is this like, do people always turn again? Is it like just a thing, a Scottish thing that you would go to the, you would collectively go? But I guess it's UK wide. People just, that's the one time in the year where you would go to the theatre as a family. You take everybody, and it sort of ticks or tries to tick a, you know, you've got a slightly blue jokes for the adults, and you've got singing and dancing for the kids and that, and it sort of tries to do, you know. And then you've got a bit of satire in there as well. But I was like absolutely blown away. I was like, this is about 500 people watching this, you know, at Mac Robert. Great.
Yeah. I know, it is great. And you're just, it is that thing. I think, you know, it becomes a tradition for people and all of this, but it is so joyous being in some of those audiences being like, oh, wow, these people are loving it.
So what's your I mean, how did you get into this then? Because I was looking at your website, and you know, I guess today's day and age you have to have a lot of strings to your bow, and you certainly seem to, you know, you got on there, you know, obviously producer, but dancer, and, you know, writer, and Eurovision fan as well, which we can get into at some point. But what was your journey to where you are now, and have you always been interested in live performance? Yeah,
it's a kind of interesting one, because I did not do drama at school or college or anything like this, and as a result quite often feel like a bit of an interloper in some of the conversations people have. But yeah, I suppose so. I got into it through studying languages.
Right.
So I'd always, like at high school, was really into like French, and I did Italian in my final year at high school, and then went to uni and did Swedish, Italian, and EU politics.
Wow.
And had sort of, I know.
Does it get easier then? Or is that a myth that if you learned 3 languages, then it gets easier to learn Arabic? Or...
I mean, I think the French and Italian definitely help each other, and also Swedish, Nordic languages I think are quite funny, because there's bits in them which are, so I grew up in Aberdeen, right, and there are bits of kind of Aberdonian, some words and dialect which have obviously come with the Vikings or whatever, so you'll be learning Swedish and most of the time you're like, this is impossible, and then you'll be like, oh, that word is like this Scots word or something, which does not help with grammar, but you know, we move. So I've kind of, I guess, sort of gone to uni thinking I would maybe go into a kind of NGO or kind of some kind of international politics type field, and well, that didn't happen. Surprise. Yeah. But
did it ever look likely to happen, or did it presume another door opened and then you thought this seems more interesting?
Yeah, it was, kind of more that. I mean, it was like getting to live abroad as part of my degree was absolutely brilliant, and it's one of those things that we've sort of lost, or at that door it has become harder to open for student, like Scots or British students, and it's really, it makes me so angry, because that was such a brilliant thing. I mean, spending a year like living in Sweden for 6 months and then in Rome for another 6 months, I mean, like, doesn't get much more cushy than that.
No.
But I think sort of studying in the kind of politics realm more and more, I was like, oh, I don't know if this is really for me. But it just happened that between my 3rd and 4th year of uni, there was a job opening. So the organisation Festivals Edinburgh runs like a kind of delegate programme where they bring people over to the Fringe and the Edinburgh festivals, and they were looking for some kind of like ticket booking assistant type role. What it had on the job advert of like, modern languages is desirable, knowledge of different languages is desirable, and I was like, aha, a job that I might actually be able to use my degree
transferable
for.
skills. Hello.
Here we go. And I guess that thing of having gone to university in Edinburgh, you know, you're sort of so surrounded by the festivals over the summer holidays that, you know, like sort of trying to find work in them feels like quite a natural choice, I guess, even if you're like, this isn't my career path, but, you know, there's so much over the summer that you might as well try and get something. I came back to it the following year, which was just a really kind of fascinating, and it's this kind of side of the Fringe or the festivals in general that I think you don't really see as an audience otherwise. You know, these things of bringing over kind of venue bookers or kind of city cultural ministers who are interested in making their cities a festival city and this kind of thing.
Right.
That whole side that you sort of wouldn't really see, and I just found that pretty fascinating, really.
Yeah, that's been new to me actually in the last couple of years, seeing that how things work, and it's just conversations, isn't it? It's just having conversations with people, getting people in the room, and you go, oh, it's not like smoke and mirrors. It's just, you know, it's humans interacting and getting to see things and having people to sort of facilitate that.
I mean, I suppose kind of prior to that, like, you know, my mum and dad were great for taking us down to Edinburgh on the sort of school summer holidays. I think just desperately trying to find things for us to do.
Yes.
You know, or like staying with aunties in Edinburgh, and you know, so you're sort of, I was already, I guess, kind of felt comfortable in that festival kind of environment as even as an audience, which I know is already a kind of door open. You know, it's like if I hadn't had parents who were interested in taking us to live performance or the value in that, could have been a very different story.
What's their background then, your mum and dad? Do they come from that world?
No, they don't. They actually both are chemical engineers initially. I mean, my mum went back to uni when I was in high school and ended up getting a PhD in history. So she is, you know, has a kind of... Yeah. But yeah, they basically, met at uni in the 80s, both doing chemical engineering, and then basically said to my brother and I, whatever you do not do chemical engineering. So I think there are times when they're like, maybe you could have chosen something that pays maybe a little bit better, but I'm happy. So that's so it is funny that that's just not certainly professionally the kind of world that they were in at all. Also,
what we talk a lot about on the podcast is people's mental health and how they negotiate that. Is there ways in which, if you're having a bad day, or you know you've come to a kind of roadblock, or in what you're doing, or you know you're feeling particularly, you know, stressed, for want of a better word, is there things you do to kind of navigate that on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things I try and remember in the context of working in the arts is that there's very infrequently an actual arts emergency. So things can be stressful and, you know, hard. And obviously, yes, sometimes there are actual emergencies that people experience. But, you know, something not quite happening to the timeline you thought or whatever is generally, you know, it's not heart surgery here. Which is, I think, kind of, I guess that's sort of trying to say maybe a bit of perspective. I suppose just trying to have those things, like trying to remember the things that, you know, make you feel better. So like I started going to Zumba at the start of this year, and I absolutely love it.
Right.
I'm a total convert.
Do you know what? I don't think I have a concept of what Zumba is. So enlighten me. I've got no idea, to be honest.
Oh man, Zumba is like kind of dance-based sort of aerobics, I guess, is kind of way we call it. And so it's all kind of Latin reggaeton type music, which I love, much to a lot of people's annoyance.
Fabulous.
But it's like, you know, an hour of going, getting, you know, pretty sweaty, jumping up and down in a dark room in the gym.
Great.
And it's that kind of thing of being, you know, quite often, you know, if it's been a kind of long day at work or whatever, and you're going, oh God, I've got 15 minutes to get out of the house and get into my gym gear and get over there. You always feel better after going.
Yes, right.
And I think a lot of people have that with different kind of forms of exercise. You know, it's, you know, whether that's running or swimming or whatever, cycling for some people, I guess. I think sort of I'm very bad for kind of, especially if it's towards the end of the week, being like, oh God, it's been a really hard week, I'll go out for a glass of wine, which is sometimes fine, but actually sometimes there's the other things of, no, go for a walk, go and move your body, or sit in the bath, or, you know, these things which just kind of take you out of that space.
Have you got a history of dance then? Is that something you studied when you were growing up as well, or you just love to dance?
It's just that I am not a good dancer. But
well,
I love it.
you know, I do you know what? I feel like you're sharking me there. You're poor sharking me there. And if you were a dancer, I'd be like, oh shit, you know,
in my
stand
head.
back.
In my head, I am a good dancer. I think if I ever saw any video, but I think that's also partially. I mean, as a teen, did go to some dance class, City Moves dance agency was just in Aberdeen, was across from my school, and they also run, dance festivals now and are really like a pretty great organisation. I mean, if I could somehow get famous enough to be put on Strictly, that would be great, but I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Yeah, that is the dream.
Well, I think also that thing of being asked, what do you do? And so often we reply to that question with what we do for work, which is, one part of, your kind of identity, and I think we have a lot of that when you work in kind of the arts or arts adjacent fields where you are kind of doing that work because you really care about what you're working on, and there is a bit of a crossover. There's a grey area between what's work and what's social, or is you're doing for it's like I enjoy going to the theatre and I work with I probably go to the theatre more because I work in it, but even if I didn't, I would still enjoy going to see live performance.
Have you seen anything in your travels that's excited you recently? That could be performance, that could be have you read anything? Have you seen a show that you've really liked?
I mean, the thing that I kind of keep banging on to anybody who will listen to me, so I'm going to do it on this podcast and all of your listeners can enjoy this, is just the work of Holly McNish. So I read, or actually I listened to her book Slug earlier in the year, which she narrates, and was like, this is brilliant. All of it is great. And loved it so much, went out and bought the book so that there are some of the poems in it that I can refer to or sort of turn back to. And then she was performing at the book festival over August, so got to see her doing some of her work live, also from her new book Lobster. I basically just think she has such an incredible way with words as a poet, but is also so kind of so she sort of mixes her poems with stories and anecdotes, and sometimes kind of rants about the state of the world and things, and I just find all of it so relatable, and just one of those things where I was sort of really struck by the beauty that she's able to capture in words. One of those where I was like, oh, I don't know how you're doing this, but it's an incredible skill. And everyone should read all of her work all of the time.
No, that sounds really wonderful, and I'm definitely going to check that out, because that kind of space between poetry and prose and undefinable ways of writing, I think that's really, really exciting. I mean, I don't have to ask you. I know that you're a fan of the X-Files.
Yes.
So, I mean, when did you get into it, and what is your relationship like with the show?
Well, it's funny because it was a total sort of lockdown hit, actually. Like, I'd seen a few episodes, I think, kind of growing up, but had, knew the theme tune, but hadn't really connected with it kind of when I was younger. And actually, when Joe and I were not that long dating, he tried to show me an episode, but he picked a really random one, and I was like, what is this? What are you trying to show me? And then in lockdown, there's so much of it, and it was on whatever streaming service we had. We were like, actually, should we just start at the beginning and watch it all? And watched it all, became huge fans, have watched the films, have, I think, started at least one rewatch of it since.
Absolutely.
And it's it's funny. So I'm quite a recent, well, I say, recent, in the past 4 or 5 years, whatever that is.
Really pleased to hear it.
Yeah.
It's, because
but I'm just No.
Because when I sort of asked which episode you'd like to watch from the last half of season 2, you said Død Kalm, but that's the one we're going to talk about, and it's season 2, episode 19, directed by Rob Bowman, story by Howard Gordon, teleplay by Howard Gordon, Alex Ganza. It's about people getting old on a boat. It is. I mean, it's wild, this episode. And I really enjoyed rewatching it, actually, because the first time I watched it, I thought, God, this is really boring. And then I got a lot more out of it the second time. It starts and we're on this US battleship. There's a mutiny going on. All the crew are getting off onto this life raft. There's a captain there, Captain Barclay. He's staying put. He says, this is mutiny. You're all terrible people. I'm going to shoot you. He doesn't shoot anybody. Then we cut to a Canadian fishing vessel where bizarrely everyone's got an Irish accent, but it's
yes, they do. They all have Irish accents.
They're fine. It's a global
weird.
show, whatever. Maybe they've all moved to Canada. Why not? So they get this what I think is a distress call. They see something on the scope of the ship. They go outside, wave the torch around, and this life raft appears out of the gloom. The fishermen realise it's the crew from the battleship. They're all mega old. Now, I mean, and then you get the credits. But I was like, if you saw that, would you immediately think, oh, there's something weird going on here? Or would you think, oh, it's just like an old folks trip out and about, Maybe they're a bit late. It's a bit late at night for that, but they're consented adults and do whatever they want. But I was like, fine, okay, we're in. This is like an interesting kick-off point for this particular episode. But what did you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, so part of the reason I'd chosen this episode was because of a lot of the like bad attempts at speaking Norwegian or kind of generic Scandi. I was like, aha, my language is like can come in here. It's hilarious. I mean, I kind of have a bit of a sort of soft spot for this episode because there are so many things in it where you're just like, what's going on? And like, what this whole thing of, why have the FBI been sent to investigate this missing, USS ship? Why is it not the Navy? And then, there is that bit early on where they're saying, oh, there have been search attempts so far, but we can't find it. And it's just Mulder being like, other things have gone missing here. We have to go to Norway.
Yeah.
Like,
because
sure.
There's a lot of exposition in this, and there's a lot of Scully in particular. Well, both of them actually, but Scully at the beginning goes, oh, we're talking about another Bermuda Triangle here, and Mulder says, oh yeah, it's called the 65th parallel. It's more like a wrinkle in time. And then we get onto this idea of the ship's a bit like the Philadelphia experiment, which I only knew from a dreadful 80s film called The Philadelphia Experiment, where it goes missing. It's like there's been some kind of experiment aboard this warship, US warship, and it vanishes and goes back in time, supposedly. But the suggestion in this, which Mulder proffers, is that, and Scully says, are you suggesting that the Philadelphia experiment used alien technology? And he's like, yeah, I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course. He's brought it back to those damn aliens again. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally, I was like trying to take some notes whilst redoing a rewatch as well, and I was, saying, oh, it's like a new Bermuda Triangle, and then they, of course, say that, and then I was like, had written underneath it, but with aliens. So you're like, it's just such a kind of classic, like, Mulder, but what if aliens kind of. And
he's like not getting Skinner involved. It's like a Skinner bill later. It's no, I'm playing this one a bit close to chest. Right, so you were legally leaving the US to go and whatever you're going to do aboard this ship, are you? Mulder rogue agent.
Yeah, completely. And then Scully being like, oh, people, like, colleagues back in the US know where we are, and, where they're trying to sort of fight off. Is it Henry Trondheim? Great Norwegian name of the. Yeah,
is he? Because she goes, but what's his connection to Norway? Because it's like she says, "Oh, you're American," and he's got an unusual accent, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. So I think I had sort of understood it as being like he was an American, but who'd maybe, I guess there's quite a lot of Scandis who moved to the Midwest historically, and maybe he's kind of come back. But the actor is John Savage, who I think was in something like The Deer Hunter,
You're right.
or it's like one of these kind of character
That's right,
actors.
yeah. And Hair, I think he was in the musical. So
Mm.
again, great casting you've got here. But to the for what, is he looking back and going, is he pleased with? I don't know. We've not asked John. John, if you're out there, if you want to come on the show and talk about whether or not you like this episode or not, then we'll have you. But yeah, it's wild, isn't it? And then they kind of get into what's causing this aging, and then Scully's the one to sort of take over and go, or maybe it's something to do with a kind of quickening of free radicals, and then again, Mulder goes through basically talking the audience through what she means by that and going, these free radicals cause you to grow old, and has that been accelerated in this water that we're drinking? But I couldn't concentrate on that by that point, because the elderly makeup they're both wearing is so bad that actually, I give it its due, it's not that bad. But what is worse is they're doing this like weird old voice, both of them as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm old now. And it's like, I'm not sure people do talk like that when they get older, right?
No, I don't think so. And I think it's really because there's the point where they've done some of the makeup to make them look like probably kind of the ages that Gillian Anderson and David Duchovny are now, or were when they did the kind of later series that kind of brought them back. And, if you had a photo side by side of, Gillian Anderson in that aged up makeup versus what she actually looked like, in her, it is.
Well, I mean, you've hit on a really great concept there of like actual time travel. And imagine if they both did look like that and are like, well, you look great. You look great, Scully, don't you? And they're like, I'm sure that David Duchovny's had a bit of Botox in his time. And why not? Why not, Dave?
Yeah.
But that's an even more sort of crazy outlook, isn't it, for time travel? I love that idea.
Yeah. And then when they get to the bit where it's the kind of the full blown, aged up makeup, and I was going, well, okay, maybe there's a thing. If you were watching this on your TV in 1995 or whatever it was, we didn't have all the high definition. Maybe it didn't look so bad at that time. But also, it's just you can see the depth of what they've put on their faces, and David Duchovny or Mulder doing this kind of slightly shaky thing. Yeah. But Gillian Anderson not. And you're like, what is this? What is this about? What are these choices?
Well, I was like reading up about the kind of the background of this particular episode, and one, it was because Chris Carter had got hold of a decommissioned battleship, so he was like, "Quick, let's make the most of it." And I think it's also used on 2 other episodes, Colony and Endgame. But it turned out being, I thought, well, that's great. We'll do a lot of shooting in here. We've had quite a stressful production up to this point with the series, so it'll be a rest for everybody. But as soon as the crew got on this boat, they realised it wasn't a rest. It was a totally stressful way of actually shooting, because it was freezing at night. Everybody, I think, was staying on the boat for a while. And it just ended up being, I think Rob Bowman, the director, described it as like the episode from hell, because it was just no one was particularly happy by the end of it. And the makeup we talked about took hours. That caused kind of substantial delays. So not all fun and games, this one, I don't think.
No, I can totally see that. And yeah, I mean, I do just love the points where it's like they had this boat and wanted to use it as much as possible, but the number of times that you can tell that it is tied up like at a quayside, and you're going, yeah. I mean, slightly, it's really suspend your disbelief in this one, I think. I also just love that, they've got so much on the boat. Well, also the thing of we're out in the mid. It's taken. People couldn't find this boat initially, and where has it gone? It kind of disappears and appears on radar, and then of course, towards the end, I guess spoilers, but they get rescued with an hour to go before it's sunk, and I'm like, oh yeah, of course they just managed to find it. Like it's so ridiculous.
It's kind of, they set up such a good game, didn't they? It's like, this, you've got some great atmosphere here. You're on this boat. Yeah. Now we're into a kind of Thing vibe again. It's like a couple of, I remember there's there's a documentary about Reservoir Dogs which had a profound effect on me when I was a teenager, and it was someone who'd written a book, was one of the talking heads on it, and he'd written a book about script writing, and he said what Tarantino's done here is basically what I say in my book, which is you take a couple of actors to one location and you chop them up, right? And how many times does the X-Files do that? You know, it's like, right, quick, let's save some money. Let's get everybody locked in one space and we'll just use the power of acting to kind of, you know, get this over the line. Fair play.
Creative. Yeah, absolutely. And I also just love, I was reading something that because I guess the only other sets in this episode are the kind of bar where they meet Henry Trondheim initially, and then the hospital at the end, which is also it's such a short screen time when they're in the hospital at the end of just being like, oh yes, you're returning to normal, thanks for taking your notes. And you're like, okay, great. What? But that was the same location.
Right.
So they had to go and find somewhere that could double as the bar and a hospital. You're going, guys, what were you doing to yourselves? Just like...
Yeah, and I'm sure I read something similar that it was like, actually, Duchovny quite liked that because it was just about 20 minutes around the corner from where he was staying. So he was quite happy. So I just popped down there and did my thing. But great, and just to talk about the ending there, they've set up this great concept. They've spent all this money on the makeup, and then they're in hospital at the end, and it's basically like a version of, you know, when like Poochie turns up in Simpsons, and it's like, how are we going to write Poochie out? Oh, Poochie died on the way back home. Pretty much that, but the X-Files really goes. Scully's like, oh, we've got to get back on this boat, and the nurse goes, no, it sank. Sorry, it sank. Diddly diddly diddly. The X-Files, really dreadful.
Just like, oh god, I know. I do really feel like, how much was it? Just we need to fill a schedule with, you know, series 2. We've been kind of commissioned for how many episodes? What the hell are we going to do to meet this demand?
I mean, there is a nice bit in the script where Mulder close to death and Scully aging wildly. They have this moment where she talks about when she'd been abducted earlier in the series, and she says, you know, when I was close to death, I realised that we've got nothing to fear when life's over. So I was like, well, that's nice. So you've kind of linked in the rest of the show. But it's very few and far between. I mean, another thing, I just wrote down the words, put down that pipe, which Mulder says at one point. So really great stuff coming out of Mulder's mouth. But fine. Let's just say fine for this episode. Cracking. You crack on, everyone.
Cracking. I mean, I think it's one of those ones which is in some ways it sort of so much kind of summarizes the X-Files for me, though, if like, you know, Scully doing her science and, you know, all of those things that, you know, I don't know if you've heard this as well, but or people have referenced it before in the podcast, but, you know, young women who watch the X-Files were more likely to go into kind of science or STEM fields because of Scully, and, you know, she's here just trying to work out what the hell is going on while Mulder runs around shouting aliens or whatever he's doing, you know, and that kind of, I guess I kind of love the Monster of the Week ones in general, just because they sort of sum up so much the kind of the sort of the self-contained nature of them, which I think is also a thing that, you know, so many long form series that we have now, you know, it is that they all have that kind of overarching story, and I'm like, just give me an episode or something that I can sit down, I can watch that, and then I can have my tea or whatever
exactly yeah, poor Scully. I mean, she's got a lot on throughout the show, hasn't she? She's dealing with what's going on in front of her. And then she's thinking about having to do these reports for Skinner and Co. And she's also got to look after Mulder, who's like essentially like a teenager. So like, fair play that you got to see that. And you, if that was going on with you probably would look about 80 by the end of it. So.
Yeah. So, you know, I think it's kind of memorable but daft, and maybe not a totally vintage one, but a kind of nice. It's one of those where I feel like if you probably wouldn't be one to like show somebody randomly, but if they had already watched a bit of the X-Files, and you were like, this one's kind of fun.
I mean, I usually ask people on the pod if it sparked off an interest in watching any more episodes, but I know it's not affected you at all. It's you love of it.
Definitely didn't put me off. Definitely didn't put
So
us
where
off.
are you on the rewatch now with it, or have you taken a bit of time off?
Good question. Yeah, we had a wee bit, although actually after watching this, then we sort of skipped back forward to where I think we were in the rewatch, sort of midway through season 3, I think. Another actually quite kind of standalone one. We're not quite, well, actually I have to say, I think on the rewatch we've been dipping in and out of the plot episodes.
It's a slog sometimes, isn't it? And because I was trying to be really regimented and go, I'll try and watch an episode a night, I don't know, I have this overarching thing where it's like I've got to get through stuff, but yeah, it's hard to watch a lot in one go, I think, which is why it was trying to go back to watching one every other couple of days now, because it just takes it out of you, because you do end up invariably, it's the same beats, it's like this happens at 10-minute mark, it does move quickly, but then this will happen at 20 minutes and then we'll wrap it up by this point. But
yeah, I think in peak lockdown we'd probably do maybe like 2 or 3, and then after that point you're going, okay, my brain is just mush.
Believe Me is written and edited by me, Chris Boyd, with production support from Steve Marshall. The music is by Johnny Boyle, and our logo is by Russ Brown. If you like the show, please do hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you out there next time.